I know I look like a lunatic wearing a hat indoors, but it's 5:30 in the morning here in Ireland, and it's pretty cold. The house hasn't warmed up yet. I saw an article this morning in the New York Post that really annoyed me. I'll read it verbatim actually. A Seattle school removes To Kill a Mockingbird from its curriculum due to racial insensitivity, I'm sure they mean. Um, yeah, this is just indicative of this woke wave that's sweeping through the West at the moment. Um, I don't know why people bother to read historical novels, you know, if they can't handle it. There's nothing I love more than reading about history and even historical fiction set in Tudor times or during the Black Death or whatever it is. And why do people generally do that? Because they want to get a taste of what it was like back then, to live back then without actually having to live back then. Because I think if we were transported to another time, we would want nothing else than to get back to this time. We kind of romanticize the past, but it would have been horrific. It was better in some ways, I suppose, but in many, many more ways, we have a much better world and a much more comfortable life now. Um, but yeah, you read fiction to, I suppose, escape from reality in a way and go to another time to wonder what it would have been like as a serf in England or wherever during the Black Death or whatever it is during Anglo-Saxon times or Roman times. And it's, people that don't read, I really feel sorry for them in a way. But to look at, the Western canon, to look at the great works of Western literature and to essentially look to be offended. You have your finely calibrated 21st century morality, and you're going through the page. The woke archaeologists are going through the pages, looking for offense. Well, this is no longer acceptable. That's no longer acceptable. Yeah, okay, but what's that got to do with anything? That's the point. They missed the point. Is that yes, to us this is no longer acceptable to us today, right? It was acceptable back then. Look how far we've come. That's the point. That's the lesson in it. But no, they just want to say, no, you can't read this because we're so delicate that we might get triggered, you know? Um, the idea that To Kill a Mockingbird has the N word in it. I don't like that word. It's not a word I would use. But, I mean, it was used ad nauseum by white people in America at that time in history. So what do you want to do? Do you want to read about whenever that was set, the 1940s, I think, um, in the American South? Do you want to see the way it was, or do you want to see the way you think it should have been? You know, what is it like? What do we do next? Do we do Shakespeare next? Do we get rid of Titus Andronicus because there's too many murders in it? The rape of Lucretia, there's obviously a rape in it. You might get triggered by the rapes in Shakespeare's plays. So do we throw Shakespeare out? What about Geoffrey Chaucer? What about John Milton? What about John Betjeman? What about Kit Marlowe? What about Percy B. Shelley? You know? What do we do with Homer's Iliad? When the Greek soldiers were um, planning to storm Troy, they were promised women as booty because women were the spoils. They were part of the spoils. The soldiers looked for gold, and they looked for women, and that's the history of the world. What do we do with Dan Carlin's podcasts? You know, Wrath of the Cans. Do we throw it out? Do we cancel Dan Carlin because of what the Mongols did? We can't listen to anything that might upset us. any rapes, any murders. Well, that is the history of the human condition, is war, rape, murder, genocide, and then over and over and over again. That is the history of mankind. And no amount of book burning will change this. And the idea that, kids are being deprived of this great literature because it's never the young kids that are offended by this. It's always when they go off to college, and get, quote, educated, then they get offended by it. And the adults are, of course, they either tacitly support their position by saying nothing, or they completely capitulate. And these young kids will be deprived of a proper education. It's incredibly sad to see this. Incredibly sad to see this. And this is not an isolated thing at all. It's not isolated. You see people going into Winston Churchill's past, and the great heroes of the past, and did everything Churchill did was good from my perspective as an Irishman? No, not at all. But I have some perspective that there's a difference between the Nazis and the guy who beat the Nazis or was instrumental in beating the Nazis. You got to keep that perspective. You can criticize some of his views, but you still have to understand that this was a man born in 1874. He's not going to have 21st century opinions about the world and that kind of thing. So it's really wrong to expect that. You will notice that they don't come at Muhammad and say, well, if somebody criticizes how Muhammad lived or what he did in life, beheading Jews and all of this, taking sex slaves and stuff, they will come out and say, well, he was born in the 6th century, and I can just see them. They're complete hypocrites. But yeah, this stuff has to die a death, and it has to die soon. Seriously, I've had enough of it.